and welcome to part 2 of TMF Debates on should sex education be allowed in public schools. If you happen to miss part 1's verbal fisticuffs, please click or tap right there to catch up before we continue. Now, to provide a quick recap, first we have pro, holding strong with the belief that sex education should be mandatory and fully comprehensive, spanning from the early years throughout all of the grades. And on the other side, we have anti, who is adamant that sex education can be covered fully by parents to help preserve family values. As the moderator, I, like you, listen to the debate. Now, let's help them listen to each other. There's a higher ground here that we can get to. However, to start that trek, in this video, we're going to lay out the 3 major disagreements that pro and anti have over sex education to help provide a little bit more context for you as the viewer to help you decide and join the debate. The 3 main points are as follows. First, pro and anti disagree on what it means to protect children. Second, they disagree on when the conversation should happen. And third, they disagree on whether mandatory actually infringes on family values or not. This can be a very charged debate because anti and pro disagree on what it means to protect children. As a result, it's really no mystery to why sex education is such a heated topic across the world and why so many public school districts struggle with this. First world countries alone vary drastically on what they are and they are not willing to tell children about sex in public education systems. And it makes sense that if societies disagree on such a massive scale, that individuals will as well. Pro and anti both care about their children. However, their moral compasses are so drastically different that they're going to end up guiding their children on different paths towards the same goal. Thus, it is reasonable to assume that everyone involved in this debate does have their children's best interests at heart. This is a point that pro is going to need to concede to anti initially just to start the conversation. It is very easy for pro to get lost in the philosophical concept of comprehensive sex education being so drastically beneficial that anyone who's against it must simply not care about their children, which is not true. Anti does care about their children, and so pro has to concede this point on the first major disagreement of protecting children. Simply acknowledging the significance that a parent can play will help both sides get closer to a middle ground. Over the years, parents help guide their children and serve as that adult role model for so long. However, when it comes to protecting children, we cannot deny that as they grow, they're going to gain new role models as well, such as teachers, pastors, celebrities, just to name a few possibilities. And in this admission is where anti is going to have to make their first concession and admit that teachers do serve a very important and vital role and can be almost as beneficial, if not more influential, than a parent. Both of these aforementioned concessions by both parties are important just to even get this conversation started. Once both sides can get past their pride on this, now we can start to talk about sex. Both sides are saying that they want an individual or individuals to teach children about sex education. They just want that person to be a trusted individual that agrees with their own personal values, which is a perfectly logical stance as parents. However, this is not a safe middle ground. If we stay here, it's just going to get more hostile. Acknowledging that both sides follow a different moral compass, to move the debate forward in this point, we will still need to stress that both sides will be needing to compromise their walls and being willing to listen to both sides. Now we want to start talking about what sex education should look like. In the household or in the classroom, doesn't matter. Just sex education in general. I would argue as the moderator that both sides can gain a deeper understanding by reviewing the comprehensive sex education guide at this point. After we've reviewed which topics we want to teach to children and what sex education would look like to us, it's important to realize that this is not the middle ground. We're not trying to convince the other person that our opinion is correct at this point. We're just trying to find some more common ground as we move into the age-appropriate talks and exactly where this sex education should be taking place. The school or the household? Again, this is not the middle ground. So regardless of where we decide we want to teach children, we need to start talking about when do we start teaching these children. People on the anti-side will be likely pushing hard for the "we cannot know when children will start sexually engaging" stance, and thus we cannot be teaching it in school, for that will dishonor the parent and child relationship. At this point, Pro is going to need to remember what they had to concede initially, and that is the point that parents can offer true, genuine value to a child's life. And to help them move forward in the debate, people on the Pro will want to pull back on their stance that mandatory education is the only all-encompassing beneficial sex education. For Pro to reach anti at this point, we want to shift the conversation away from children to people that are actually having sex. Married couples. People on the anti will likely be a little bit more receptive to married couples having sex rather than the concept of their own children having sex. And the question to move the debate forward towards the middle ground here would be, if someone is having sex, would it not stand to reason that that person should be educated about having sex? Educating married couples on sex may not only enhance their own personal time, but it would also stand to reason that they would be more capable of passing along this education on to children. To move the debate forward at this point, Pro and anti will need to participate in a hypothetical situation of what happens if we start educating married couples about sex education. We can utilize our previously defined sex education for our own individual values, and here now we can start pushing towards what should we be teaching the people who are actually having sex. I believe that if we stay within the confines of the after-marriage sex talk, we will be able to create a safe zone to be able to talk about the debate of what sex education would actually look like if implemented towards the public. Remember, it is essential that both parties stay as humble as possible to strive towards the middle ground in this debate. Within this safe area of the after-marriage sex talk, you want to be as honest as possible of what you feel like sex education should be taught, regardless of what side you're on, because we've already agreed that these individuals would benefit from sex education. To ensure coherency, it could additionally be beneficial to revisit the fully comprehensive sex education guide to help discussions on what we should be teaching adults about sex. The purpose of this exercise is actually to build a sex education curriculum that we both can agree on for the after-marriage sex talk. We would be, in essence, operating under the assumption that married couples are going to become parents, and that they would be teaching their children what they learn about sex. This way we can ensure that as many children receive sex education as humanly possible, before we even involve the schools. This video's point is to help people join the debate on sex education. However, at this point, I need to put in a very important warning before continuing. As we start to talk about schools, it's going to start getting dicey, because this is where the most contention is. This is where people disagree the most. And throughout this discussion, you or whomever you're talking to may have hit a point where they cannot go forward anymore, and it's become too infuriating or too frustrating to have this conversation. And remember, it's okay. There's no shame in walking away or changing the subject. If you truly feel you cannot make any more progress in this debate with whomever you're talking to, change the debate or walk away. There's no shame in it. We all have our own personal limits before we go completely insane. And we don't want to lose our sanity, because if we start to lose our sanity and result to ad hominem attacks and logical fallacies, then we're going to start breaking down all the progress we've made up until this point. Keep in mind that this truly may be a conversation for tomorrow, if you cannot continue it today. Let emotions settle before we move into the final disagreement. We've already talked about how both sides want to protect their children. We've talked about when we should actually be talking about sex, and one of the middle grounds that we can find here is a safe haven of an after-marriage sex talk. And now we're going to finally be moving into the conversation about what sex education will look like in public schools. So, with that in mind, let's continue. To progress the conversation further, we're going to need to entertain yet another hypothetical situation. This one, Anti is going to have to fully agree to play along with, as we're going to give Pro essentially control over the entire debate by entertaining a hypothetical situation of what if sex education was mandatory. In this hypothetical situation, sex education has to happen. There's no way to get around it. The federal government is coming down and they will close down the school if they do not teach sex education. So Anti is going to have to be willing to play along here, to join the debate. With all the progress we've made thus far, we want to shift everything we've decided from the after marriage sex talk into the before marriage sex talk, or the before puberty sex talk. We want to start talking about what ages are truly appropriate for school children to learn, what schools should be teaching, and if the sex education should be mandatory or not. Remember, it has to happen, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be mandatory. It could be opt-out sex education. Pro, to continue to join the debate, may have to concede this point to Anti and say, okay, I believe since sex education is already happening to the vast majority, maybe it's not the most detrimental thing for a few people to opt out of it. Given the fact that they are going to be educated after marriage when they start to fully engage in sex and become parents themselves, thus they can educate their children properly. One of the biggest debates within this debate, that's a weird way to say it, is Pro wanting comprehensive sex education to be included as early as kindergarten. And not talking about sex, but laying the foundation for sex education. Anti very well may be fully uncomfortable with sex education being introduced as early as kindergarten, even if it was just to lay foundational material for relationship growth. Again, in this hypothetical situation, sex education has to be mandatory. Thus, if we did implement the fully comprehensive sex education, which would include a full K through 12 system, Anti will need to have their opt-out option. And if Pro can give Anti an opt-out option to fully get away from any kind of mandatory sex education, then this, folks, is where I believe that the middle ground truly lies. For this is a win-win situation. Pro wins in the respect that they will ensure as many people are educated as possible in the matters of sex and relationships. And Anti wins in the respect that they can get away from any kind of indoctrination that they perceive to be a threat to their own personal virtues or their family values. And no matter what side of this debate you're on, I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm just here to help you join the debate on should sex education be provided in public schools. To reach my middle ground, we had to talk about what it means for people to be protecting their children. When should we even be talking about the sex education in the first place, and what it would look like if sex education was truly mandatory. This is a long trek, and again, I want to stress, if at any point you or whomever you're talking to hits a wall or point where they cannot go forward, stop the conversation or change the subject, because this truly could be a talk for tomorrow. But today, we want to make as much progress as physically possible without losing our sanity. Parents, especially, but people in general, have heightened emotions and loads of opinions when it comes to educating children. So make sure you keep in mind and keep wary of pushing too hard on your stance, and whether or not you're listening enough to truly make that trek towards the middle ground. But that's just my opinion. and I'd like to know what you think. So please join the debate in the comment section down below. Have you thought of a middle ground that's a little less tedious and wouldn't actually take multiple conversations? Or maybe a middle ground that you found that is a little bit more gentle. Whatever you think, please let me know what you think in that comment section down below, and join the debate. Regardless if you do or not, I appreciate you spending your time with me. And now, let's wrap this episode up. Please hit that notification bell to make sure that you join the debate for a new episode in 2 weeks. And if you like what I do on this channel, please check out the description box for easy to follow me links across the interwebs and my Patreon page to truly join the debate. Now, as always, this has been TMF, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the time in whatever zone you find yourself. Dittos!